PS organizations, in my mind, are comprised of one key asset, which is really your people. Your organization tends to be centered around services delivery and people supporting that delivery. That, of course, delivering the service offerings that you've defined for the organization. Could be staff augmentation, could be software deployment or implementation, it could be hardware installation, but all of those combined basically provide the mechanism for you to earn money as a professional services organization. So with your people delivering your service offerings, and then of course you have the cash flow coming in to be able to build the organization in a variety of ways. But how do you actually measure how you're doing as a PS organization? I look at the way that successful organizations measure. But how do you look at the measures? Like, what measures do you need to put in place? I look at basically a category of 4 different layers of measures that you have to consider as you're measuring the success of your organization. One is simply measured, and what is measured means is really your actuals. What have you done, and what does it look like right now? And when I say at a glance, that would be sort of, obviously as of right now, as of today, but at a glance also means extending back to things like trending, understanding metrics that you can trend over time to see if you are improving or declining in areas that need to take action, such as average bill rate, for example. If that starts going down, then you need to look at maybe margins or fixed price projects, maybe dragging that down, or your sales team is discounting services too much. The third layer is predictive. So this is where you're sort of anticipating what's going to happen, and you're looking forward. This is where you start doing your staff planning and understanding how you're going to schedule the work and really where are you going to get to, how are you going to get to those numbers that you've set out for the fiscal year in earnings. And finally, the last layer is proactive. So this is really sort of the most mature and successful organizations is they're looking constantly to see how they can improve on maybe estimation. How can they create other service offerings? Where can they expand the company? And this is where you're using the previous 3 levels to come up with those ideas, come up with those actions to continue to build on the organization and grow it. So in order to sort of take you through these 4 levels, an organization is best equipped to go and measure these things if they've set up key performance indicators, or KPIs they're known, to be able to support the success of your organization, to be able to set the right KPIs so that you can look at them at a glance and understand whether you need to take action, whether there needs to be some adjustment, or whether you can continue doing what you're doing and just build staff, for example. So what are some of the most common KPIs? I've listed a few here for us to go through. You may be familiar with them. Some of them you may not be familiar with. And some of them are sort of in that gray area of are they PS metrics or are they more finance metrics? So things like utilization. This is a pretty common PS metric. Utilization is a person-based metric. It's a metric that identifies how productive or billable a person is. And there's a variety of definitions for utilization. Definitely a key indicator to help you understand how billable are your people, how productive are your people, productive meaning things like are they doing things that will grow the business like pre-sales efforts or building sales demos or completing internal projects that will streamline the business. Those could all be things that you would consider productive utilization. And you can measure utilization in a variety of ways, and a lot of PSA tools out there will help you define the various utilization metrics that you need to track and understanding what contributes to those. Compliance. So it's great that you have an organization and you're getting utilization metrics, but the metrics are only as good as the data that you're getting. So are your people compliant with your timesheet policies? Are they compliant with your expense report policies, your travel policies? To be able to contain costs, to be able to ensure that you have accurate data on a timely manner. So compliance is something that should be measured, actually, so that you understand if people are adopting your policies and the information that you're looking at is reliable. Backlog and forecast. So backlog in Many organization definition is what have I sold but yet not delivered. So it could be in-flight projects and where they're at with their budget burn. It could be signed deals that you just haven't scheduled yet. That would all be backlog. And then forecast would be how are you going to deliver that activity? How are you going to deliver on the backlog, but also where are you at from a pipeline perspective? That sort of blends into your sales cycle a bit, but professional services sort of tends to be in that middle section where you're having to deal with understanding what's coming down the pike from sales and then also communicating back over to the finance team because backlog and forecast, although they're money metrics, also drive the need for maybe staff headcount because you need to be able to bring in more people to be able to deliver the services that you have. Project margin. I see a lot of companies do margin reporting, obviously P&L reporting, profit loss reporting at department levels or at company levels. But really if you can drill down to the project itself, project margin can be very telling on how you're managing the staffing and the delivery of that project. As a project manager, you may be asked to measure margin from maybe an hours perspective, not really a money perspective. But project margin is one of those good metrics that if you look at some of your larger projects and sort of understand what your target margin is and where you end up at the end of the project, understanding if you're way off from margin, in many cases for fixed price projects you may be lower than you expected. Were our estimates wrong? Were we using too expensive of resources? Did we have to buy a lot of subcontractors versus using in-house people? The margin can be impacted by a lot of decisions as you deliver a project. And I know everyone's concern is customer first and making sure that the project is successful, but the project margin also can be very indicative of what was needed in order to deliver that project and how can we avoid any of those pitfalls and ensure the margin is increased next time around. Capacity versus demand. This is your staffing situation, and it could be by person or by skill set. So if you have a specific skill that's in demand, like maybe Java development or project management, you could measure sort of what do you have as far as headcount and what do you need as far as headcount. And the demand really comes from your resource management approach, which could be loosely tied into or actually tied into your forecasting activity. So capacity versus demand is more of your staffing resource. But then if you look at the revenue by PS resource, this capacity versus demand, if you see that you're needing 3 or 4 new PMs, how much revenue does that equate to? And by tracking a revenue by PS resource metric, you can very easily see what the average revenue is per person and then break it down by maybe levels of skill sets or types of resources so that you can see where you would get more of a money growth from the company if you hired certain individuals as long as there was demand for them. Days sales outstanding. So this is more of a finance metric, but this is the collection metric, right? So if you're invoicing customers, you have a net terms on your invoice. How often, when are you collecting that money? And so it's a cash flow metric. So the smaller your days sales outstanding, the closer your invoicing activity is to having, cash come right in the door. So keeping this number low is always a good objective for companies because they do have that cash flow, watching the cash flow along the way. Bid to win ratio. So this is more of a sales metric, but why it helps PS organizations is that if you know that you're always engaging in pre-sales and you're winning 85 to 95% of the deals, the fact that you're sitting there and writing the proposal means you should be looking at your staffing and doing early planning because 9 times out of 10 you're going to win that bid. If your bid-to-win ratio is low, then you may be spending a lot of time putting proposals out there, but they're not effective. So obviously that would be more of a sales investigation to understand why the proposals are not effective. But the higher your bid-to-win ratio is, the earlier you should start planning and the earlier you can look at that capacity versus demand and see where you're going as a company. So it's much more dynamic. Customer satisfaction. So this is a bit harder, a little bit harder one, more subjective, obviously. But if you send out customer surveys on a regular basis, you should be able to get some kind of customer stat information back. Net Promoter is an example of a customer stat where they enjoy working with you and being able to understand whether customers would come back for repeat business. So customer satisfaction, survey-based, but I also look at it as so a repeat business mechanism. Ideally, your organization is of a nature that customers can come back to you, and the reason they would come back is because you're a trusted source. Schedule versus budget. So this is your typical project management metric. So is the project on schedule? Is it on budget? Can I forecast that it's going to end on schedule? Does it go to forecast that it's going to end on budget? Obviously, project managers are trained in this type of activity, but there's lots of tools out there within a PSA or outside of a PSA, for example, that would be able to help project managers with this metric. And understanding how often your projects are over or under budget or on time, late, ahead of schedule, that kind of thing is a good metric to understand how well your project plans are being managed. Average bill rate. So this, along with sort of your headcount capacity versus demand, can really kind of give you your revenue by PS or your plan for revenue. So if you can find the average bill rate could be grouped into different types of offerings even. But your average bill rate tends to be something that you use to understand how your price list is being adhered to and understanding how much money a person could make if they hit sort of target utilization, for example. Like if I expect somebody to hit 1,900 hours of billable work a year and they're doing it at around the average bill rate, I should be able to get X revenue in the door. So therefore, where can I tweak things to be able to get more revenue in the door? Do I need to raise my bill rate? Do I need to look at more fixed fee? What's going to be the impact by watching this bill rate metric? Revenue per offering. So this is where you're looking at what are your money makers in the organization. You could have service offerings that are known to be break even only, and those are your sort of loss leaders to be able to get your foot in the door and then be able to work with a customer in a trusted environment to build on that relationship and build on those offerings. So, revenue per offering, not everything has to be profitable, but there has to be a justification for things that are not profitable, and does that open the door for other areas. And finally, gross margin. So gross margin is definitely your P&L, your high-level, more organization margin metric, something like that. So, of course, this is definitely a financial metric. Executives will be looking at that to see if you're hitting sort of industry standards as far as before and after EBITDA. It's like a 20%, 40% type metric to be able to understand if you're going to be profitable in the long run and you have monies to play into for investment. So with all those different metrics, and that's just a sampling, there's many, many more metrics out there. And I'll give you some sources at the end of this webinar to look into to find out some other metrics that may be useful for you, like utilization, for example. But if I take these metrics, the reason that you would track them would be understanding how your organization is doing, again, at a glance, but can you break it down into each of these categories, the people, the service offerings, and the earnings? And I would argue, yeah, you can, because there are people-based metrics, there are project or service offering-based metrics, and there are quite a few, of course, financial-based metrics. And these all kind of work in tandem with each other because although they're lined up with the different professional services organizations areas, there are some interdependencies between these metrics. So as I was looking at these metrics and sort of comparing it to the levels of measurement, how do these metrics really kind of pull together with those different levels and understanding where am I at as a company and what am I measuring as a company so that I can be, the most successful with the growth and scalable and building the organization. So I take all those metrics and I kind of put them together and line them up by category across the 4 levels. You can see sort of where they fall. And then if you take a look at this grid and say, well, I measure this, where are you at as far as the levels of maturity, so to speak, in the organization? So just taking the first one, like measured, this is where organizations you're measuring it as of right now, which is good information. It gives you sort of it's definitely a snapshot view. It establishes your KPIs, so it could be something where you actually establish sort of a base and initial value, but it's really only a point in time, and you can't act too much on a point in time, and if you do, it's reactive because it's already happened. You're measuring stuff against what's already gone by. So if your DSO is like 90 days, now you don't know if that's been trending up or trending down. So that's you don't know what corrective action to take. So that's the next level, is if you're looking at trending these metrics, what does that mean? So you're trending KPIs over a period of time, and you can see sort of where things increase or decrease or improve or start to decline. And because of that, you can sort of start seeing what in the organization is impacting those metrics. Why are they improving? Why are they declining? And then you can take action. Now you're taking still a little bit of reactive action because you're measuring actuals, but you're at least seeing the trends. And at this point, this is the level where if you're trending information, utilization, capacity, your backlog, your bill rates, all that kind of stuff, if you're trending that information, that does give you sort of a pattern feel so that you can use it as an insight to look forward. So it's sort of this middle ground. It's not necessarily true proactive or predictive measurements, but the fact that you're seeing these trends, making assumptions that the trends should continue as long as you don't see any huge outside influence changes. Maybe the trending can also be your step into that predictive level. Now the predictive is true predictive, so you're actually doing future planning. So you're not necessarily relying on trending to plan things out, but you are planning things proactively, like what's in the pipeline based on my bid to win. Am I going to need these kind of resources? Let me plan those resources. Do I have that headcount? Am I looking at my staffing? Do I have a staffing bench that I can pull off of when I need to fulfill positions in the company? All of this is sort of in your predictive area. So you want to see where you're going from a bill rate, where you're going from a margin perspective, where you're expecting to go from a bid to win. So if you're doing more predictive type KPI measures, you can definitely see where the company is growing and where things may not be growing as much, and then you can make some decisions on whether we keep this type of offering or not, and whether we need to adjust it to make it more profitable or more attractive to customers. So this is definitely a proactive level of KPI measurement where you're wanting to make sure that you can see the future of where the company is going. And then the final level is proactive. So proactive and predictive, you can kind of think of them to be the same thing, but when I look at proactive organizations, really proactive means that I'm acting on the information to do something else in the organization. I'm not just continuing to measure it and see, do I need to hire 3 more people? I'm looking to understand, based on this information, do I need to adjust how we estimate large bids? Do we need to create new service offerings? Is there a new skill set that we need to start establishing and hiring for, because we are getting demands in this area where we definitely need sort of an advanced administrator for Salesforce, for example. So you're making more strategic decisions at this point based on the information, and then feeding that back into the whole measured loop and trending that information. So definitely impacts your staffing capability, maybe understanding what type of staff, changing the way you do estimation, maybe adding new service offerings, subtracting. So this is where you're doing more adjustment of the organization, because you're taking action based on what you've seen as far as the organization has been, where it has been going based on the other 3 levels. So, of course, it's great to say that you need to have KPIs, but, where do you start? What KPIs apply to you? Which ones are going to be the most helpful? How can I get the information pulled together? So really, I think in terms of, look to see where you're making your money today. What current offerings do you have in the marketplace? And if you can't identify that, that's step 1. Like, what do you do, right? But find out where the service earnings are coming from, and what's driving those earnings, right? So is it because there's a market for them? Is it because you have a good marketing campaign? Is it because you're the best at it, or that you have a great price? What's the driver for customers engaging you in that service? And then what type of resources do you need to drive that, right? So after that, you start looking at, okay, so look at those offerings, and how close are we to delivering what it is we said that we would deliver? And again, what kind of resources that we need. So you can see sort of how you can start measuring those individual offerings. And then, of course, once you measure individual offerings, you can roll that up at a higher level. And then finally, looking more directly at the resources, So your service offerings, you're making money in the service offerings, you're delivering on time, that's all great. Are your resources being productive? What's your billable hours ratio to bench? Are you overworking your resources? Where's the time spent? What kind of skills do they have? Are people repurposed? Are they focused on one area? So all of those are different categories that you need to sort of break down so that you can establish the KPIs to measure things like utilization, maybe start establishing targets and understanding what service offerings are profitable, making the money, why to keep other ones around, and be able to set goals and measurements for those as well. So then once you've broken all the information down, you start consolidating that into different KPIs so that you can establish that at-a-glance dashboard, so to speak. A dashboard is only as useful as the data that it relies on. So definitely, Excel, I always joke, is the best PSA tool on the market, but it's very manual and you can't really maintain it and share it and have it be more real time. So invest in something like a PSA tool, professional services automation tool. There are many quality tools on the market. We specifically focus on NetSuite OpenAir and FinancialForce PSA and modules. There's others out there. You can go back to our webinar in January where we talked about the different options out there in the marketplace. But a PSA tool does enhance your ability to collect information and make the information transparent and more real-time accessible, provided people are compliant with your policies. So once you put the KPIs in place and you've got a tool that will help you make it better, definitely commit to reviewing those on a regular basis. Commit to a cadence. Nothing's worse than collecting data for data collection's sake. You really have to set up a reason why you're collecting data and how you're going to consume that data and when you're going to consume that data, because that derives the need for data points to be updated at certain times, thus the compliance measure. So commit to a cadence to review your KPIs on a regular basis once you've established them, because without that cadence, you're not going to get that trending feel. You're not going to be able to make those strategic, proactive decisions in the future. And then take action. Ask questions why things are going up, why things are going down, why things are looking good, why things are not looking good, and then be able to make decisions for the organization based on the data that you have in front of you. So in general, professional services organizations, they're really ripe for KPI measures. If you put them in place, you can eventually become very proactive in understanding sort of where your trending organization is going, and then being able to see those trends and make some proactive decisions about the organization. You have to start somewhere, so start with a core base, build on that as you find needs in the organization, plug into what the industry is doing. Many organizations have best practices out there or advertise things about what the industry is doing. So plug into those and set up KPIs in a similar manner that would be accommodated for your organization. There's other resources that you can go to find more information out about KPIs. Of course, our website has a lot of information about the PSA-based measurement of metrics. But other organizations like SPI Research, PS Village, TSAA, all of these are very focused on professional services organizations and have a number of resources that you can plug into or leverage to understand more about the services measurement organization and the KPIs that will be helpful for you.